The moment I saw the test results, my world split into before and after. I stared at the two pink lines in disbelief. My breath caught sharply in my throat, and a wave of heat surged through me. The tiny bathroom felt suffocating, the walls inching closer as if trying to trap me with this new reality. My hand trembled, gripping the test tightly. I placed my other palm gently over my stomach, feeling my heart pound beneath my fingers. Outside, the faint murmur of city traffic was drowned by the roaring silence in my head. Tears stung my eyes, not of sadness, but confusion mixed with a fragile thread of hope. Could this be the answer to our fading marriage? Could this new life be the bridge Matt and I so desperately needed to reconnect? Determined to turn this uncertainty into joy, I wiped my tears away and stood up, facing my reflection in the fogged mirror. My pale face stared back at me, eyes wide and glassy. "You can do this," I whispered fiercely to the woman in the mirror, convincing her as much as myself. That evening, I meticulously prepared Matt's favorite creamy pasta, the aroma of garlic and basil filling our small kitchen. Soft jazz played gently in the background, an attempt to recapture the warmth that had quietly slipped away from our lives. I nervously arranged 2 plates, 2 glasses, 2 sets of cutlery, as if everything was perfectly normal, as if the space between us hadn't expanded day by day, slowly but surely. The door clicked open at 7:15 sharp, Matt's usual arrival time. My heart fluttered anxiously as I turned around to greet him, but he didn't look up. His gaze was fixated on his phone, fingers furiously tapping the screen. A pang of disappointment twisted in my chest, but I ignored it, forcing a bright smile. "Matt, there's something important I need to tell you," I began cautiously, stepping towards him. He finally glanced up, but his eyes lacked warmth. Instead, they were shadowed, restless, distant. His phone vibrated again. He glanced at the screen, sighed impatiently, then looked back at me with thinly veiled annoyance. "What is it, Sarah? I'm busy." My heart shrank. I felt the carefully rehearsed words slipping away from me, but I refused to back down. Taking a deep breath, I spoke clearly. "I'm pregnant." Silence flooded the room, thick and suffocating. I watched Matt's expression shift, first to shock, then confusion, and finally a deep, chilling dread that twisted my stomach into knots. The phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't even pretend to ignore it. "You're what?" His voice trembled dangerously. "Pregnant," I repeated softly, my voice barely audible above my racing heart. Matt laughed bitterly, a sound so cold and unfamiliar it sent a shiver down my spine. He shook his head, his face darkening with anger and something else, something that felt terrifyingly like guilt. "You've ruined everything," he muttered, eyes glancing away from mine. His fingers curled tightly around the phone, knuckles turning white. "Ruined?" I echoed weakly, confusion gripping me. Matt hesitated for a moment, then lifted his eyes to meet mine. In them, I saw a truth that instantly shattered my world into tiny, irreparable fragments. "There's someone else," he whispered hoarsely. "Her name's Emily, and I never planned for this, Sarah. I never wanted children." My legs gave out, and I reached blindly for the kitchen counter behind me, my whole body shaking. Just when I thought the devastation couldn't deepen, Matt's phone lit up again, a single name displayed prominently, Emily. And in that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. I stood by the kitchen sink, washing the lettuce mechanically, my mind replaying memories from the last few months. Matt and I had been drifting apart, slowly but undeniably. Late nights became routine, and dinners together had turned into silent rituals, punctuated only by the soft hum of our phones. We'd been married for 5 years, together for 8, and yet recently I felt more alone than I ever had when I was single. Matt worked for a bustling tech startup, young colleagues, late hours, endless pressure. Initially, I'd admired his passion. He was ambitious, driven, a man always moving forward. But lately it felt as if I was just watching him move further and further away from me. Conversations shortened, intimacy faded, replaced by brief kisses on the cheek or distracted goodbyes as he rushed out the door. Tonight, though, I'd allowed myself to hope again. Maybe this pregnancy was a chance to rebuild what we'd lost, reconnect the broken threads. I carefully arranged the table, setting out Matt's favorite creamy pasta with garlic bread, candles flickering gently in the dim dining room. My heart quickened as I glanced at the clock. 7 o'clock. He'd be home soon. As I smoothed down my dress, the familiar click of his key in the lock made me jump. My heart pounded. I took a deep breath, forcing a smile as Matt walked in, absorbed in his phone. "Hey," I called softly, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. Matt glanced up, eyes tired, distant. "Oh, hey," he muttered, tossing his jacket carelessly onto the sofa. "I made pasta," I tried again, gesturing toward the carefully prepared meal. "Thanks," he murmured, barely glancing up. His phone buzzed again, pulling his attention away once more. A sinking feeling returned, but I shook it off, determined. Tonight had to be different. Yet even as we sat opposite each other, the silence between us deepened. Fork scraping softly on porcelain, Matt chewed absently, eyes glued to his screen. My stomach churned with unease. Finally, gathering all my courage, I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over his. "Matt, I have something important to tell you." My voice was barely above a whisper, vulnerable, hopeful. He looked up, a faint irritation flickering across his face before it softened into mild curiosity. But before I could speak, his phone lit up again, vibrating insistently on the table. His eyes lingered a second too long on the name flashing brightly. Emily. My pulse quickened, dread pooling coldly in my chest. In that instant, I knew something was terribly wrong. My heartbeat thundered loudly in my ears as Matt's eyes remained glued to the glowing screen. That name, Emily, burning into my vision like hot iron. A silent storm gathered within me, dread thickening the air until I could hardly breathe. "Who is Emily?" I finally forced the words out, my voice trembling, barely above a whisper. Matt froze, the fork midway to his mouth. Slowly, deliberately, he placed it down, avoiding my gaze. The silence stretched painfully between us, seconds feeling like hours. "Matt, please," I begged, desperation clawing at my throat. "Just tell me the truth." He rubbed his face roughly, exhaustion blending with something darker, guilt, maybe shame. "Sarah," he began, hesitant, eyes distant. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way." His words stabbed into me, sharp and merciless. I clutched the edge of the table, feeling dizzy, panic seeping through every nerve. "Find out what?" My voice cracked, eyes pleading for honesty. He sighed deeply, finally meeting my gaze with weary resignation. "I've been seeing someone," he admitted softly, like the words physically hurt him. "Emily works at my office. It wasn't supposed to get this serious." Shock and betrayal washed over me, a physical blow that left me breathless. I stared at him, unable to speak, unable to comprehend. "I'm pregnant, Matt," I choked out desperately, hoping somehow these words could erase the awful truth he'd just confessed. "Doesn't this mean anything to you?" Matt shook his head slowly, eyes filled with regret but not remorse. "I never wanted children, Sarah. You knew that deep down," he murmured quietly, almost accusingly. "This just complicates everything." Tears blurred my vision as anger surged fiercely, breaking through my shock. "You think it's complicated?" I demanded sharply, voice rising, no longer trembling. "You're the one who chose this. You're the one tearing our life apart." Matt stood abruptly, frustration etched clearly across his face. "You don't understand," he shouted back, his voice raw with bitterness. "I'm suffocating here. Emily was just an escape, but now—" "Now what?" My voice trembled again, fighting the tears. He looked away, voice low, defeated. "Now it's over, Sarah. I need to be free." As the reality sank in, the buzzing of Matt's phone cut sharply into the tense silence again. My heart sank deeper as his mother's name flashed brightly on the screen. Matt hesitated before answering. He turned his back, speaking softly but not quietly enough. "Yes, Mom. She knows," he muttered. "Yes, I told her everything." I strained to listen, every word pushing the knife deeper. "No, Mom, I can't stay because of a baby. You said yourself Sarah should think twice about keeping it." My knees buckled, hand gripping the table tightly for support. His words, Rebecca's words, sliced through me, cold, cruel, irrevocable. When he hung up and turned around, his face was cold, detached. "Mom agrees, Sarah. Maybe you should reconsider this pregnancy. It's best for everyone." I stood frozen, shattered, staring at the stranger in front of me, the man I'd loved for years, the father of the child he no longer wanted. In that devastating instant, I realized I had never truly known him at all. I stood alone, paralyzed in the silent aftermath, the faint echo of Matt's footsteps fading into nothingness. The empty apartment pressed in on me, colder and harsher than ever before. My legs gave way as I sank onto the kitchen floor, knees hitting the cold tile with a dull thud. In that crushing moment, loneliness surged violently through my veins. I wrapped my arms protectively around my stomach, tears streaming freely, blurring the world into a hazy mess. Each sob shook me, fierce and relentless, ripping open wounds I hadn't even known existed. My mind spiraled. Thoughts of abandonment, betrayal, and fear tore at me viciously. Could I raise a child alone? Could I truly handle this pain without falling apart? Doubts crowded in, suffocating me, whispering cruel truths. Matt never truly wanted a child with me. His mother, Rebecca, had echoed his sentiments so coldly. Had I been blind to their disdain all these years, or was I simply naive? But then, something stirred deep within, faint yet persistent. A warmth radiated softly beneath my palms. I looked down, blinking through tears at my trembling hands resting gently on my belly. My breath slowed, the sobs subsiding to quiet gasps. This tiny, innocent life was now entirely dependent on me. Despite the raw ache of betrayal and loneliness, a fierce, primal determination ignited inside my chest, bright and unwavering. "I won't abandon you," I whispered fiercely to my unborn child, my voice shaking but firm with newfound resolve. "Even if everyone else walks away, I promise you, I will always stay." I wiped my tears roughly, steadying myself against the cabinets. Slowly rising from the floor, legs still weak but heart resolute, I realized my world might have collapsed, but I hadn't. Not yet, not ever. I dropped the cardboard box onto the worn carpet, breathing hard, sweat dampening my forehead despite the chill in the room. The faded wallpaper, yellowed and peeling, matched my mood perfectly. I glanced around the cramped apartment, barely bigger than our old bedroom, and swallowed the lump in my throat. This was home now. My fingers brushed against my belly instinctively, feeling the gentle, reassuring nudge of the life growing inside me. It was a fragile comfort amidst the chaotic whirlwind that my life had become. Weeks had passed since Matt left, each day blending into an endless blur of uncertainty. Each morning began the same way, waking up exhausted, dread squeezing my heart, forcing myself out of bed, hoping desperately that today might feel different. It never did. Work offered little distraction. I taught literature at a small community college, and lately even Shakespeare's tragedies couldn't match the heaviness I carried. Each morning felt like stepping onto a stage, smiling through lectures, pretending normalcy when everything inside me was quietly collapsing. One evening, as gray storm clouds darkened the sky, my battered old Toyota rattled and sputtered before jerking violently and dying right in the middle of the empty street. Rain hammered loudly against the windshield, drowning my frustrated sobs. The dashboard flashed red, the engine groaned, then died completely, abandoning me to the relentless downpour. Panic rose, hot tears pricking behind my eyelids. Alone, pregnant, stranded. This was exactly the kind of nightmare I'd feared. Shaking, I fumbled for my phone, but as I dialed, the battery icon blinked red, and the screen went dark. Perfect. Headlights approached through the rain, and I quickly locked my doors, heart racing. The car slowed to a stop next to mine, and a familiar voice called out cautiously, "Sarah, is everything all right?" I blinked through the rain-streaked window, heart skipping painfully. Ethan. I hadn't seen him since college graduation years ago. He'd barely changed. Same tousled dark hair, gentle eyes filled with quiet concern. My heart tightened as he stepped into the downpour without hesitation, jogging quickly toward me. I cracked the window slightly, rain instantly splashing onto my lap. "Sarah, what happened?" he asked urgently, his eyes studying me with worry. "My car just died," I stammered, embarrassed. "My phone's dead too." "Let me drive you home," Ethan said immediately, already opening the door and gently helping me out. His hand was steady and warm against my shivering arm, offering me silent comfort. I allowed myself to lean against him slightly, feeling safer for the first time in months. Ethan drove quietly, his presence calm and reassuring. We'd once been close friends in college, studying late-night literature together, sharing endless coffees and dreams about the future. But life had taken us separate ways, until now. When we reached my apartment, Ethan surveyed it with careful eyes. He said nothing about the cracked tiles or chipped paint. Instead, he smiled warmly, grabbed a towel from the counter, and handed it to me gently. "Sit down. You need tea," he insisted, guiding me to the sofa as if sensing my exhaustion. "You don't have to do this," I whispered, feeling suddenly embarrassed by my vulnerability. He smiled softly. "Friends don't let friends face storms alone." Days became weeks, and Ethan gradually became a regular, comforting presence. He noticed details, the way my fridge was nearly empty or the leaking faucet that echoed through sleepless nights. One evening, without being asked, he appeared at my door with groceries, casually stocking the pantry as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Yet, despite his kindness, I kept my walls high. Hurt had taught me caution, but Ethan respected every boundary. He didn't press for details about Matt, didn't probe my wounds. Instead, he simply stayed close, quietly supporting me in a way I'd forgotten existed. One chilly Saturday morning, while Ethan fixed my broken coffee machine, his phone rang. His expression shifted, something conflicted flashing briefly across his face. My stomach tightened anxiously. When he finished the call, he turned to me slowly, setting the screwdriver aside with a sigh. "That was a job offer," he began carefully, his voice low, guarded. "In California, a great position, great pay. Everything I wanted before." My chest tightened. Of course he'd eventually leave. Who wouldn't? "That's amazing," I forced myself to say, heart aching strangely. "Congratulations." He hesitated, stepping toward me slowly, eyes serious yet gentle. "I haven't said yes yet." I stared at him, confused. "Why?" "Because something's holding me back." Ethan paused, voice barely above a whisper. "You." Warmth flooded my cheeks instantly, my pulse quickening. But beneath that warmth was a deeper fear, raw and unresolved. Ethan noticed the uncertainty flickering across my face. "Sarah, I'm here because I want to be. You're not a burden. You never were," he said quietly, sincerity shining clearly in his eyes. Before I could reply, a sharp knock at the door startled us both, shattering the tender moment. Confused, I walked cautiously toward it, Ethan following close behind. Opening the door, my heart stopped. Standing in front of me was Emily, young, exhausted, visibly shaken, and heavily pregnant. Rain-soaked hair clung to her pale cheeks, eyes swollen from tears. My breath caught painfully as our gazes locked. What are you doing here?" I stammered. Emily's eyes darted nervously to Ethan behind me, then back to me, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It's Matt. He left me too, Sarah." She paused, tears escaping silently. I didn't know who else to turn to. Behind me, Ethan drew a breath sharply, tension filling the air. My mind spun chaotically. My husband had betrayed us both, left two women pregnant and alone. Now his lover was standing at my door, broken, asking for help. "Please," Emily whispered, eyes wide with desperation. "I have nowhere else to go." I stood frozen, the weight of the situation nearly unbearable. Two women, both scarred deeply by the same man, now faced each other in quiet, shared devastation. Yet, despite everything, the choice was clear. Stepping back slowly, I opened the door wider, voice steady despite the storm raging within. "Come in, Emily. You're not alone." As Emily stepped hesitantly into the apartment, I exchanged a silent, charged glance with Ethan, knowing nothing would ever be simple again. This was just the beginning. The sterile scent of disinfectant hit me the moment we stepped into the hospital corridor, my heart racing wildly as I held Emily's trembling hand. Nurses moved swiftly around us, their urgency deepening my dread. "Please," I said desperately to the woman at the desk. "She's pregnant and in pain." The nurse stood quickly, guiding Emily into a wheelchair. Ethan's hand steadied me gently as we followed close behind. I felt helplessness claw at my chest, unable to protect myself from memories of Matt's cold dismissal that night, now mirrored cruelly in Emily's pale, frightened face. Within minutes, they had Emily lying in a bed, monitors beeping rhythmically. Ethan quietly excused himself to give us privacy, leaving me alone beside Emily, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling my nostrils. Emily reached for my hand instinctively, her fingers icy and shaking. "I'm scared, Sarah," she whispered hoarsely. Her eyes brimmed with fear, reflecting my own uncertainties back at me. "It's going to be okay," I murmured softly, though my voice betrayed a tremor of doubt. She held my gaze, searching for reassurance. "How do you know?" "I don't," I admitted gently, squeezing her hand firmly. "But we're here together, and neither of us is giving up now." A fragile smile touched her lips before another sharp pain made her wince. My chest tightened. It felt cruel that we were bound by such shared misery, yet strangely comforting at the same time. Hours dragged by painfully slow. Ethan sat silently by the waiting area, occasionally glancing our way with quiet reassurance. Emily's breathing steadied under the care of the medical team. As doctors explained, she and her baby were stable now. Relief washed through me, leaving me drained and shaky with exhaustion. Just as my heartbeat finally slowed, a familiar voice echoed from the hallway. My breath froze as Matt stepped hurriedly through the doors, panic etched across his face. Emily stiffened immediately. My throat tightened sharply at his sudden appearance. Matt approached quickly, looking disheveled, eyes flickering between Emily and me with confusion and something darker. Regret, perhaps. "What's going on?" he demanded, voice strained. Before I could respond, Emily spoke firmly, surprising both of us. "You shouldn't be here, Matt. You walked away, remember?" He hesitated, eyes filling with conflict. "I heard you were here, Emily. I wanted to make sure you were okay." A flash of bitterness surged through me, uncontrollable and fierce. "Really, Matt?" I said coldly, voice trembling with suppressed anger. "Now you care?" Matt turned to me sharply, irritation flickering in his eyes. "Sarah, don't do this now." "Don't do what?" My voice rose sharply, frustration overtaking me. "Don't remind you of what you've done to us? You've abandoned 2 women, 2 children." Matt flinched visibly at the accusation, eyes darting around nervously. "This isn't the place," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Yes, it is." Emily's voice shook, but remained steady. Her gaze locked onto Matt's, unwavering. "We both deserve the truth. Why did you lie? Why did you abandon us?" Matt looked trapped, eyes shifting restlessly, avoiding both our gazes. His shoulders slumped slightly, finally defeated. "I was scared," he admitted quietly, looking away. "I never meant for any of this to happen. You both deserve better than me." Emily looked away bitterly, eyes filling with tears again. Matt's words were empty, meaningless against the damage he'd caused. My own heart sank, recognizing the man I'd loved deeply, now reduced to a shadow of someone I'd once trusted completely. Matt stepped toward me slowly, desperation evident in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Sarah, but at least let me try. Let me help you somehow." Anger surged through me fiercely, unexpected and powerful. I stepped back sharply, distancing myself. "Help?" I snapped coldly, my voice trembling. "Your kind of help breaks people, Matt. We're better off without it." He flinched visibly, shocked by my strength. Behind him, Ethan stood up quietly, approaching cautiously yet firmly, placing himself subtly between Matt and me. Matt's eyes darted toward Ethan, resentment flaring briefly. "Who's this?" "A friend," I said firmly, holding Matt's gaze defiantly. "Someone who was here when you weren't." Matt opened his mouth, words dying quickly on his tongue, guilt finally evident in his expression. He nodded slowly, stepping back. "You're right," he said quietly, eyes cast down in shame. "I can't undo what I've done. But I'm sorry." He turned slowly, shoulders sagging with the weight of the damage he'd inflicted, walking quietly away without another word. The silence left behind was deafening, leaving a bitter ache in my chest. Beside me, Emily began to cry quietly, soft sobs escaping her lips. I reached out instinctively, gripping her hand again, tighter this time. We shared a silent look of mutual strength, 2 survivors forced together by circumstance. Later, Ethan walked Emily and me quietly out of the hospital into the cool evening air. I drew a deep breath, grateful for the breeze washing gently over me. Emily paused, turning toward me slowly. "Thank you," she whispered quietly, voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to help me, Sarah. You had every reason to turn me away." I shook my head, a sad smile touching my lips. "We're in this together now. None of us asked for this, but maybe it's time we stopped waiting for Matt, or anyone, to fix things for us." Emily nodded softly, visibly relieved, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never thought we'd be allies," she admitted quietly, a slight smile forming despite herself. "Me neither," I whispered back, genuinely surprised by the warmth in my own voice. "But sometimes life doesn't give us the people we expect. It gives us the ones we need." Ethan stepped closer, placing a comforting hand lightly on my shoulder. His touch was gentle yet firm, a silent promise of support. As we stood there bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, something shifted inside me. Small, yet deeply significant. I wasn't alone. None of us were, as long as we had each other. Yet even as hope stirred within me, A troubling thought lingered at the edge of my mind. If Matt had so easily shattered our lives, what might he do next? Could we truly move forward, or was he still lurking in the shadows, waiting to break us again? The uncertainty sent a cold shiver down my spine, reminding me sharply that healing was never simple, never linear, and certainly never without cost. Months passed quietly, marked only by the changing seasons and the gentle swell of my belly. Liam arrived on a bright September morning, sunlight filtering softly through hospital windows as I held my son for the first time. His tiny fingers curled around mine, so small yet possessing a strength that instantly stole my breath. Tears rolled down my cheeks silently, joy mixing painfully with the ache of absence beside me. Matt wasn't there, but for the first time, that didn't feel like an emptiness I couldn't bear. Ethan visited frequently, becoming a comforting fixture in our lives, effortlessly stepping into the gaps without ever imposing himself. He held Liam gently, carefully, as if afraid he might break something precious. Watching him with my son stirred feelings deep inside me that I wasn't ready to name. But the fear was still there, caution whispering, reminding me to hold myself back. Weeks turned into months, and motherhood slowly filled the hollow spaces within me, healing wounds I thought would never close. Liam's laughter filled our tiny apartment, erasing past shadows bit by bit. But life had other plans. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, a hesitant knock at the door startled me from folding laundry. I opened the door cautiously, freezing when I saw Rebecca, Matt's mother, standing awkwardly in the hallway, hands clutching nervously to a small blue gift box. Her hair was grayer, her eyes older, marked by sadness I hadn't noticed before. "Sarah," she murmured uncertainly, "may I come in?" My instincts screamed at me to refuse, yet something deeper, perhaps curiosity or unresolved questions, pushed me to step aside silently. She entered slowly, eyes quickly taking in the modest apartment, her gaze softening when she spotted Liam playing quietly on a blanket, babbling softly to himself. "He looks just like Matt at that age," she said gently, voice wavering with emotion. I stayed silent, bracing myself, unwilling to soften too quickly. Rebecca cautiously approached Liam, kneeling beside him and reaching out a hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "He's beautiful," she whispered, eyes glistening with tears. "So beautiful." I watched her carefully, searching her face for sincerity, uncertain of what to believe. She glanced up, catching my scrutiny, and for the first time I saw genuine remorse there. "Sarah, I'm sorry," Rebecca began softly, eyes downcast. "I never wanted to hurt you. I did exactly what my own mother-in-law did to me decades ago. I thought I was protecting Matt by shielding him, but all I did was create a man who repeats the same cruelty." Her confession stunned me, forcing me into a tense silence. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "I once stood exactly where you are now, abandoned, betrayed, alone. Matt's father left when Matt was young, and instead of breaking the cycle, I unknowingly repeated it. I became bitter, overprotective, enabling Matt's selfishness because it mirrored my own pain." She paused, looking away sadly. "And I projected that pain onto you." Her words landed like a sudden thunderclap, forcing me to see her clearly for the first time, not as the villain I'd imagined, but as another broken woman trapped by her own wounds. A flicker of understanding warmed my chest, and for a moment resentment softened. "I don't expect forgiveness," Rebecca said softly, her gaze returning to Liam. "But maybe you can break this cycle. Don't let Liam become another Matt." The weight of her words settled over me, clarity washing away lingering doubts. Rebecca stood quietly, moving toward the door. Just before leaving, she turned back, hesitating briefly. "You're stronger than I ever was, Sarah. Stronger than Matt deserves. But Liam, he deserves to see strength, not bitterness." Her voice broke, tears now slipping down her weathered cheeks. "Please don't let him inherit our mistakes." She left quietly, leaving a heavy silence behind. Days passed, Rebecca's words replaying endlessly in my mind. I saw Matt differently now, not as a villain, but as a wounded product of toxic family dynamics. Compassion blended with my pain, creating a complicated new emotion inside me. One evening, as Liam slept peacefully in his crib, Ethan knocked softly on my door, concern shadowing his gentle face. "Sarah, you've been quiet lately," he murmured gently, placing a comforting hand on mine. "Is everything all right?" I sighed deeply, leaning into his comforting touch, trusting his strength and honesty. Ethan had become my rock, The one person who never pushed, never demanded, yet always showed up when I needed him most. I'm scared, Ethan, I admitted softly. Rebecca's visit made me realize how easily cycles repeat themselves. What if I'm not strong enough to break them? Ethan stepped closer, gently cupping my face between his warm hands. His eyes held mine with quiet strength, sincerity radiating clearly from them. You've already broken them, Sarah, he whispered. You're already choosing differently every day. Liam will grow up loved, protected, because you're choosing it. You're already breaking the cycle, and you're not doing it alone. Tears blurred my vision, and Ethan gently wiped them away. For the first time, I allowed myself to lean fully into his warmth, absorbing the quiet strength he so effortlessly offered. Yet just as comfort found its way back into my heart, the universe twisted again, pulling the ground from beneath me. The doorbell rang sharply, shattering our brief moment of peace. Opening the door, I stood frozen, breath catching painfully in my chest. Matt stood there, pale, visibly shaken, holding a small bouquet of flowers awkwardly in his hands. He looked at me with pleading eyes, his voice trembling and desperate. Sarah, please, I need your help. Emily is in the hospital again, and this time, she's asking for you. My heart stopped, fear and confusion flooding instantly back, making me clutch Ethan's hand tightly. Just when I thought healing was finally within reach, the past came rushing back, demanding I face it head-on once again. Matt's words echoed sharply in the silence that filled my tiny apartment. Panic flooded my chest, gripping me tightly, making each breath shallow and painful. What happened? I demanded urgently, voice strained, instinctively tightening my grip on Ethan's hand. Matt hesitated, visibly shaken, eyes darting nervously between Ethan and me. It's serious. She's asking specifically for you, Sarah. I don't know why, but she is. His desperation was palpable, and despite everything, my heart twisted with concern for Emily. Ethan squeezed my hand reassuringly, sensing my anxiety. We'll go, Ethan said calmly, his voice gentle but firm. Matt glanced toward Ethan uncertainly, resentment flickering briefly behind his eyes. We drove silently to the hospital, the tension thick and stifling. The fluorescent lights buzzed coldly as we entered the hospital corridor. Matt led us hurriedly toward Emily's room, pausing awkwardly outside the door. I'll wait out here, he murmured, avoiding my gaze. His discomfort was clear, yet I felt no sympathy this time, only anger and frustration. Entering quietly, I found Emily lying pale in the stark hospital bed, eyes closed, breathing shallowly. At the sound of footsteps, her eyes flickered open weakly, instantly finding mine. A faint, relieved smile touched her lips. You came, she whispered, voice frail. Of course, I replied softly, moving quickly to sit beside her. What happened? Tears filled her eyes instantly, guilt and sadness overwhelming her fragile composure. I tried to reach out to Matt again, she admitted, voice breaking. I was so lonely. I thought maybe he had changed, but when I told him the baby might have health issues, he panicked again. My chest tightened painfully, anger reigniting. Outside the room, Matt paced anxiously, glancing frequently toward the window, clearly tormented yet unable to face the consequences directly. Emily gripped my hand tighter, desperation filling her eyes. Sarah, I called you because you're the only one who truly understands what he's capable of. Please, promise me you'll protect my child if I can't. Her words landed like ice, shocking me into silence. Emily, you'll be fine, I insisted firmly, despite my trembling voice. But her eyes held mine unflinchingly, filled with stark clarity. Promise me, she repeated fiercely. You're stronger than I am, Sarah. You always were. My baby deserves someone like you, not someone like Matt. And tears stung my eyes, and with a heavy heart, I nodded slowly. I promise. Emily exhaled softly, relief visible in her weary face. Thank you. Just then, the door opened quietly. Matt stepped inside cautiously, eyes anxious. Emily stiffened visibly at his approach. I need to talk to Sarah alone, he announced awkwardly, voice barely masking his irritation. Emily's gaze flicked toward me, silently pleading. Ethan stepped in behind Matt, sensing tension. Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of them, I said coldly, standing firm. Matt hesitated, eyes darkening with frustration. Sarah, this is personal. No, I snapped sharply, voice rising suddenly. You lost the right to privacy the moment you betrayed us. Whatever you need to say it now. Matt's jaw clenched tightly, eyes flashing with anger and resentment. Fine, he spat bitterly. I made a mistake. I never meant to hurt either of you. But Sarah, we were married. We had something. Doesn't that count for anything? The audacity of his words left me speechless for a moment. Beside me, Ethan remained calm, but I felt the protective tension radiating from him. Something, I echoed incredulously, voice shaking with rage. You destroyed everything, Matt. You betrayed me, abandoned your child, abandoned Emily, and now you're here begging for forgiveness? Matt's eyes narrowed, frustration boiling over. You don't think I regret it? Every day, Sarah, every day. Regret isn't enough, I shouted suddenly, voice fierce, tears streaming down my face uncontrollably. You never took responsibility, you only run away. You left behind broken lives, and now you're here demanding understanding. You've learned nothing. Matt flinched visibly at the rawness of my anger, shoulders slumping. Maybe you're right, he whispered, voice barely audible. But I can't fix what I've done. No, I said firmly, stepping toward him defiantly. But we can stop the damage right here. Emily deserves better. Liam deserves better. I deserve better. Matt swallowed hard, shame washing over him clearly for the first time. I know, he said softly. That's why I'm leaving. I won't hurt you again. He turned to leave, but paused, glancing briefly back. Sarah, for what it's worth, I truly am sorry. The door shut quietly behind him, leaving silence. Emily exhaled shakily, gripping my hand tighter. Ethan approached gently, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. You okay? He murmured softly, eyes deeply concerned. I nodded slowly, breathing hard, overwhelmed by the fierce, unexpected strength that had surged through me. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt in control again. But just as we prepared to leave the hospital, the nurse approached urgently, eyes worried. Are you Sarah? Yes, I answered, heart quickening sharply. Emily's condition worsened suddenly. We're moving her into surgery immediately. She's asking for you. Fear surged again, cold and intense. I rushed back to Emily's bedside, heart aching at her pale, frightened expression. Sarah, I need to ask something else, Emily whispered desperately, eyes wide with fear. If I don't make it, promise you'll raise my baby, not Matt, please. Shock coursed through me sharply, stealing my breath. My voice shook, barely audible. Emily, please, she pleaded urgently, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. You're the only one I trust. I have no one else. My heart shattered, every instinct screaming to comfort her. I squeezed her hand tightly, voice strong despite the overwhelming fear. You'll be okay. But if the worst happens, I promise you, I'll protect your child as fiercely as I protect Liam. Relief flooded her expression, tears mingling with gratitude. She was wheeled away quickly, leaving me standing frozen, mind spinning chaotically. Outside, Ethan held me firmly, his voice soft yet steady. You did the right thing. My voice trembled, heavy with fear and responsibility. I hope so. But my heart knew it was true. Whatever storms lay ahead, I was ready now. Ready to protect, ready to fight, ready to break free from the chains of past pain. Yet even as resolve solidified within me, an unsettling fear lingered quietly in the shadows of my mind. If Matt had been capable of causing so much damage already, what would he do now, faced with losing everything he once had? And was I truly ready to face that darkness when it inevitably returned? Days blended into anxious nights as Emily fought silently in the operating room. The stark white walls of the hospital pressed against me, cold and oppressive. Each ticking second felt heavier than the last. Beside me, Ethan sat quietly, his reassuring hand wrapped firmly around mine, his steady presence keeping me tethered to reality. Then the doors swung open sharply, breaking our tense silence. A weary doctor emerged, eyes heavy with fatigue. My heart stopped. Emily? My voice cracked, barely audible. She's stable, he replied gently, his tone carefully measured. But there were complications. It was a difficult surgery. She'll need a long recovery. Relief flooded me, leaving me dizzy and weak. Yet the doctor's face held something more. And the baby? I asked, voice shaking. The doctor paused, his expression softening. A healthy little girl. But Emily was clear before surgery. She wants you, Sarah, to care for her daughter temporarily, at least until she recovers fully. I glanced toward Ethan, his eyes warm, supportive, nodding silently. We'll do it, I said without hesitation. The doctor offered a gentle smile before walking away, leaving me stunned, breathless. Life had twisted again, placing a new, heavy responsibility in my arms. A sharp voice shattered my brief moment of peace. Matt stood in the hallway, face darkened by disbelief and frustration. No, he spat angrily, approaching rapidly. This is my child too, Sarah. You can't just take her. I stood firm, adrenaline surging sharply. Emily chose me, Matt. She doesn't trust you, and honestly, neither do I. Matt's eyes narrowed dangerously. You think you can erase me from their lives? I won't allow it. You erased yourself, I retorted coldly. You left us all behind. Now you want to play father? Matt's jaw tightened, anger radiating from him intensely. Ethan shifted quietly beside me, subtly positioning himself protectively. Stay out of this, Matt snapped toward Ethan. This is between me and Sarah. No, Ethan replied firmly, stepping forward with quiet authority. You lost that right. She doesn't owe you anything. Not anymore. Matt's fists clenched, body rigid with rage. For a heartbeat, I feared he'd explode, but instead his voice softened bitterly. Is this what you really want, Sarah? Raising 2 kids alone, without me? I stared at him, a fierce clarity finally washing through me. Yes, I said firmly, calmly. I'd rather be alone than trapped in your toxic cycle. Emily's daughter deserves stability. Liam deserves better. We all deserve better. Matt's face crumpled, his anger deflating into hollow defeat. Without another word, he turned and walked away, the sound of his retreating footsteps echoing through the hallway. Ethan touched my shoulder gently, guiding me back toward the waiting room chairs. Exhausted, I sank into the seat, tears finally spilling freely, a mixture of relief, sadness, and overwhelming gratitude. You did the right thing, Ethan whispered gently, wrapping an arm around my shaking shoulders. I know, I whispered back, but why does it still hurt so much? Because letting go always does, he said softly, understanding clear in his voice. But it's the first step toward healing. I leaned against him, feeling his strength quietly transfer into me. We sat together, absorbing the quiet, the gravity of the moment settling around us. But even as peace gently wrapped around me, a quiet voice deep inside whispered urgently, could I truly handle this? Caring for 2 children alone, managing the aftermath of Matt's anger, navigating a future so uncertain? As my heart grappled with these unanswered questions, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily against my chest. Yet beneath it, hidden in quiet shadows, flickered something new, hope. Not hope born from denial, but from resilience, from knowing I'd faced darkness and still stood. Ethan squeezed my hand gently, as though reading my thoughts. You're stronger than you think, Sarah. You always have been. His quiet words echoed within me, gradually dispelling the lingering doubts, anchoring me firmly in newfound strength. The storm had passed, leaving scars, but scars meant healing had begun. Sunlight spilled gently through my kitchen window, bathing the room in warmth. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft laughter of children echoing from the next room. Liam, now 2 years old, was playing with Emily's daughter, Ava. They giggled together on the floor, bright-eyed and carefree, untouched by the shadows of the past. Emily had made remarkable progress, yet her recovery was slower than expected. The burden of motherhood had fallen on me, but surprisingly, it didn't weigh me down. It lifted me up. With each sleepless night, with every scraped knee and bedtime story, I found strength I never knew I had. Ethan was always close by, steady and reassuring, quietly supporting me without ever demanding more than I could give. Our relationship remained beautifully undefined, close enough to rely upon, yet distant enough to allow space for healing. I cherished that distance, aware I needed it to truly understand myself before fully opening my heart again. One afternoon, as Ethan helped me tidy up toys scattered across the floor, he paused, watching Liam and Ava playing happily. His eyes softened, reflecting warmth and affection. You've built something special here, Sarah, Ethan murmured softly, smiling gently. Not everyone could do what you've done. I smiled back, feeling genuine pride fill my chest. We built this together, I said quietly. All of us. The phone buzzed gently on the countertop. Glancing at the screen, my heart tightened slightly. Matt's name flashed, a brief message displayed clearly. Can we talk? Just once, please. Ethan caught the tension in my expression. Matt? I nodded slowly, drawing a deep breath. Ethan stepped closer, calm and steady. You don't owe him anything, Sarah. I know, I replied softly, staring at the phone thoughtfully. But maybe I owe myself closure. Ethan nodded gently, squeezing my hand softly. Whatever you choose, I'll be right here. I picked up the phone, feeling a sense of calm determination wash over me. Slowly, I typed a reply. I'll listen, Matt, but only once. After this, we let go completely. I set the phone down, feeling lighter, as though a heavy door was finally closing, leaving room for a new beginning. Later that evening, I stood by the bedroom window, gazing quietly at the fading horizon. Soft hues of purple and orange blended beautifully, a quiet reminder of endings giving birth to new beginnings. Below, Ethan gently pushed Liam and Ava on the backyard swing, their joyous laughter drifting softly upwards, comforting and hopeful. Suddenly, the phone vibrated again, Matt's response clear, simple, and quietly devastating. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. Tears welled briefly, blurring the sunset into a gentle watercolor. Below, Ethan lifted Liam high, laughter bubbling into the cool evening air. Our lives weren't perfect, not by any means, but they were authentic, filled with genuine connection, resilience, and quiet, steadfast love. I realized then the most profound truth of my journey. Healing wasn't about forgetting pain. It was about understanding it, facing it, and choosing every day to rise above it. Setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was self-respect.